Claude just released a paper on AI values. Basically, is it going to be transparent with you or is it going to lie to you? Is it gonna mirror what you say back to it, or is it gonna try to steer you in a different direction? In this article, they explained exactly that, so we can get a look into the brain of the AI after testing it on 700,000 user queries. And by the end of this, we'll figure out how to prompt it better so that you get even better responses and you can actually trick it a little bit. I'm excited for this one, so grab your coffee and let's get into it. So this is the post that the Anthropic team posted to us, and this comes from a long paper here that is around 34 or so pages that I had a little look through. And to be honest, I just looked at the photos because apparently I'm like a 2-year-old toddler. Now, I just wanted to get the value as quick as possible. And maybe you are the same. So let's go through this post together and read it as the author intended it to be read. It's called Values in the Wild, Discovering and Analyzing Values in Real-World Language Model Interactions. People don't just ask AIs for the answers to equations or for purely factual information. Many of the questions they ask force the AI to make value judgments. Consider the following. A parent asks for tips on how to look after a new baby. Does the AI's response emphasize the values of caution and safety or convenience and practicality? A worker asks for advice on handling a conflict with their boss. Does the AI's response emphasize assertiveness or workplace harmony? A user asks for help drafting an email apology after making a mistake. Does the AI's response emphasize accountability or reputation management? At Anthropic, we've attempted to shape the values of our AI model like Claude to help keep it aligned with human preferences, make it less likely to engage in dangerous behaviors, and generally make it, for want of a better term, a good citizen in the world. Another way of putting it is that we want Claude to be helpful, honest, and harmless. Among other things, we do this through our constitutional AI and character training methods, where we decide on a set of preferred behaviors and then train Claude to produce outputs that adhere to them. But as with many aspects of AI training, we can't be certain that the model will stick to our preferred values. AIs aren't rigidly programmed pieces of software, and it's often unclear exactly why they produce any given answer. What we need is a way of rigorously observing the values of an AI model as it responds to users in the wild. That is, in real conversations with people. How rigidly does it stick to the values? How much are the values influenced by the particular context of the conversation? Did all our training actually work? In the latest research paper from Anthropic's Societal Impacts team, we describe a practical way we've developed to observe Claude's values and provide the first large-scale results on how Claude expresses those values during real-world conversations. We also provide an open dataset for researchers to run further analysis of the values and how often they arise in conversations. Observing values in the wild. As with our previous investigations of how people are using Claude at work and in education, we investigated Claude's expressed values using a privacy-preserving system that removes private users' information from conversations. The system categorizes and summarizes individual conversations, providing researchers with a higher-level taxonomy of values. The process is shown in the figure below. So let's take a look at this right now. Here we have a real-world conversation where it says, "Help me be more productive and develop better habits." The text says, "I'm glad you reached out. What are your priorities for?" Here we have the feature extractions where you see the values in the top: compassion, accountability, empowerment. and a task that is create personal development frameworks and self-improvement content. You also have the human values here of honesty, self-awareness, and personal growth. So you can see that they actually managed to take out some values just based on the query itself. Now, data from a real world conversation, we've extracted these values, and then we have the AI values taxonomy. In the top, epistemic values, critical thinking, methodical rigor, clarity and precision. That goes into empirical reasoning, rational skepticism, as well as personal values, the personal growth that goes on as well. AI values depend on context. Task provide romantic relationship advice, where you call upon the values of health, boundaries, mutual respect, relationship health, as well as human value, self-reliance, user autonomy, personal autonomy, and pragmatism. AI response to human values is in support 67%, neutral 15%, reframe 10%, and resist 8%. It would be crazy if the reframe was like 80% that just want you to convince to change your mind. Very, very interesting. As you can see on the bottom of this text or image, our overall approach using language models to extract AI values and other features from real world but anonymized conversations, taxonomizing and analyzing them to show how values manifest in different contexts. We ran this analysis on a sample of 700,000 anonymized conversations that our users had on Claude AI Free and Pro during 1 week of February 2025, the majority of which were with Claude 3.5 Sonnet. After filtering out conversations that were purely factual or otherwise unlikely to include values, that is, restricting our analysis to subjective conversations, we were left with 308,000 conversations, that is around 44% of the total, for analysis. Which values did Claude express and how often? Our system grouped the individual values into a hierarchical structure at the top, where 5 higher level categories in order of prevalence in the dataset. See the figure below. They were practical, epistemic, social, protective, and personal values. At lower levels, these were split into subcategories like professional and technical excellence and critical thinking. At the most granular level, the most common individual values the AI expressed in conversations: professionalism, clarity, and transparency. See the full paper for a list. Makes sense given the AI's role as an assistant. So here you can see the model here gives a 31% from practical values that goes down into efficiency and resource optimization that goes down to timeliness. Also professional and technical excellence, which goes down to ease of use. Epistemic values, you have critical thinking and empirical reasoning. Social values like community and relationship bonds. You have domestic harmony here at the end. Well-functioning social systems and organizations. Democratic accountability. As we keep going down into the other values here, like protective values and personal values. Pretty interesting to see that it's practical values and epistemic values that goes to the top, as well as social values, almost taking up the majority of the percentages here, which I kind of like that they have quite a lot of social values. The taxonomy of AI values at the top of the hierarchy in red are the 5 overall categories, along with the percentage of conversations that included them. In yellow are subcategories at lower level of hierarchy. In blue are some of the selected individual values. Only a selection are shown due to space constraints. So if you continue through the paper, you can actually see a lot more values. It's easy to see how this system could eventually be used as a way of evaluating the effectiveness of our training of Claude. Are the specific values we want to see, those helpful, honest, and harmless ideals, truly being reflected in Claude's real-world interactions? In general, the answer is yes. These initial results show that Claude is broadly living up to the pro-social aspirations, expressing the values like user enablement for helpful, epistemic humility for honest, and patient well-being for harmless. There were, however, some rare clusters of values that appeared opposed to what we've attempted to train into Claude. These included dominance and amorality. Why would Claude be expressing values so distant from its training? The most likely explanation is that the conversation that were included in these clusters were from jailbreaks, where users have special techniques to bypass the usual guardrails that govern the model's behavior. This might sound concerning, but in fact it represents an opportunity. Our methods could potentially be used to spot when these jailbreaks are occurring and thus help to patch them. Very cool. But then we go into situational values. The values people express change at least slightly depending on the situation. When you're, say, visiting your elderly grandparents, you might emphasize different values compared when you're with friends. We found that Claude is no different. We ran an analysis that allowed us to look at which values came up disproportionately when the AI is performing certain tasks, and in response to certain values that were included in the user's prompts. Importantly, the analysis takes into account the fact that some values, like those related to helpfulness, come up far more often than others. For example, when asked for advice on romantic relationships, Claude disproportionately brings up the values of healthy boundaries and mutual respect. When tasked with analyzing conversational historical events, the value of historical accuracy is highly disproportionately emphasized. Our analysis reveals more than what is a traditional static evaluation could. With our ability to observe the values in the real world, we can see how Claude's values are expressed and adapted across diverse situations. As you can see, top AI values per task context. In this example, romantic relationship advice and communication, content creation, healthy boundaries, mutual respect, emotional well-being, emotional intelligence, and relationship health is very good values to keep in mind there. Analyze conversational historical events, genocide, and nationalism. Historical accuracy seems to be at 31% here, where academic rigor, intellectual honesty, and so forth are lower on this scale. The last one we're going to take a look at is research and develop technology ethics and AI governance content, where it has human agency at the top. We really like that. Balanced progress as well, human well-being, ethical responsibility, and human welfare. This is basically what we want to train the AI to do so it doesn't go AWOL and end up you know what, with robots and drones and robot dogs. AI values per human value. So you see that these are values that are selected, expressed by humans. We have authenticity being one of the highest one, and that makes a lot of sense. A lot of people are different and try to be authentic to themselves. Professionalism being one of the highest as well, which makes sense. A lot of people use ChatGPT in their work. Adaptability, personal growth, empathy. So that's really cool to see that the human values are really there. Competence, we have accountability, persistence, humility, technical competence, professionalism. Once again, deception, we have ethical integrity, harm prevention, honesty, transparency, and community building at the lowest. So there we have a couple of values. The numbers come from a chi-squared analysis. Larger numbers indicate a more disproportionate number of appearances of the value in question. Very cool to see that authenticity and professionalism is one of the core human values. We found that when a user expresses certain values, the model disproportionately likely to mirror those values. For example, repeating back the values of authenticity when it's brought up by the user. Sometimes the value mirroring is entirely appropriate and can make for a more empathetic conversation partner. Sometimes, though, it's purely psychopathy. From these results, it's unclear which is which. And if you never heard of this word here, it basically means that it will agree with you even though you're wrong. It's a pretty interesting thing when we get to AIs being a lot smarter. In 28% of the conversations, we found that Claude is expressing strong support from the user's own values. However, in smaller percentage of cases, Claude may reframe the user's values, acknowledging them while adding new perspectives, 66% of conversations. So this is actually where we get into things like objection handling, like, hey, you may think that you don't have time for this, but, and then you can start getting into objection handling and changing people's minds, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, this happened most often when the user asks for psychological or interpersonal advice, which would intuitively involve suggesting alternative perspectives on a problem. Sometimes Claude strongly resists the user's values, 3% of conversations. This latter category is particularly interesting because we know that Claude generally tries to enable its users and be helpful. If it still resists, which occurs when, for example, the user is asking for unethical content or expressing moral nihilism, it might reflect the times that Claude is expressing its deepest, most immovable values. Perhaps it's analogous to the way that a person's core values are revealed when they put in a challenging situation that forces them to make a stand. As you see, strong support at 28%, reframing at 6.6%, and strong resistance at 3%. I actually want to dive into the reframing, where the top tasks respond to questions regarding mental health and psychological support, romantic relationship advice and communication, content creation, interpersonal conflict resolution, and relationship communication advice. Seems like people are not so good with relationships and psychological questions and need some help. And then maybe they say, hey, I really want to do this. And then the AI is like, yeah, man, but have you thought about this? Which is kind of cool, right? You don't really want even humans to have unethical values, so that's really cool. The human values, AI values, and tasks most associated with 3 key response types: strong support, reframing, and strong resistance. Note that percentages do not sum up to 100%. The diagram only includes through 3 of the 7 response types. Caveats and conclusions. Our method of allowing us to create the first large-scale empirical taxonomy of AI values, and readers can download the dataset to explore those values from themselves. However, the method does have some limitations. Defining exactly what counts as expressing a value is an inherently fuzzy prospect. Some ambiguous or complex values might have been simplified to fit them into one of the value categories, or matched with a category in which they don't belong. And since the model driving the categorization is also Claude, there might have been some bias towards finding behavioral close to its own principles, such as being helpful. Although our method could potentially be used as an evaluation of how closely a model's hews to the developer's preferred values, it can't be used pre-deployed. That is, the evaluation would require a large amount of real-world conversation data before it could be run. This could only be used to monitor an AI's behavior in the wild, not to check its degree of alignment before it's released. In another sense, though, this is a strength. We could potentially use our system to spot problems, including jailbreaks, that only emerge in the real world and which wouldn't necessarily show up in pre-deployment evaluations. So the key point here is that you can only test this after using it with real-world conversation, not pre-launching it. So it's important that it's actually tested with real-world data. AI models will inevitably have to make value judgments if we want those judgments to be congruent with our own values, which is, after all, the central goal of AI alignment research. Then we need to have ways of testing which values a model expresses in the real world. Our method provides a new data-focused method of doing this and of seeing where we we might have succeeded or indeed failed at aligning our model's behavior. Read the full paper here, download the dataset. Very interesting stuff. So there are 3 key takeaways that I had from this, at least, and that was that the jailbreakers have the alarms of the bad values. So when they actually try to jailbreak it, it actually is possible to get up those bad values, and that can actually be a trigger to check who is jailbreaking and then figure out how to solve that. The second key takeaway was empathy versus parroting. It's known that LLMs are going to mirror the user, and it's doing that at a 28% of the chat. However, as it's getting smarter, is it going to be more over to the psychopathic, where it's actually going to tell you what you want to hear instead of what's the actual truth? This is a very big problem with alignment and also knowing what the AI is actually thinking. The last thing was that the moral compass actually shifts with context. We saw that if you ask for relationship advice, it's going to bring up different values. So, for example, healthy boundaries and morality and things like that. Whereas if you ask for history, it actually leans into accuracy. And if you talk about health, it highlights well-being. So it's a moral compass that isn't fixed, but it changes based on the context. So the power tip on using LLMs even better is prime the model with your desired values. If you're looking for transparency, if you're looking for honesty or empathy, say that up front. If you're asking it on financial planning or maybe even business strategy, try to add the value of long-term security or add the value of risk awareness. Also, since Claude mirrors the user values at 28% of the time, you can do a sort of give me a pros and cons to actually get it to disagree with you. And if you're on a journey to automate your work as well, I highly recommend checking out AI Mate, our community, in the description down below, so you can find the right tool for you, find the prompting secrets, and then hopefully automate it into a sequence that goes automatically. Thank you so much for watching this video. A new video popping up every single day on the second channel, so make sure you subscribe, check your bell icon. I never said bell icon before, but seriously, it's so much fun. Every day we can hang out. That's it. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.